What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Many of these ideas that we had became an impossible way of life. We just could not live up to our expectations. And I want to start to explore that in the context of step 2. So we've looked at step 1, and remember what I said about the steps. There's something that's so incredibly powerful and remarkable about how the steps work. Is they develop this charge, right? This energy that sets you up, prepares you for a change. And the step that follows, we call it the step that immediate follows, let's say step 1, step 2, now resolves some of that energy that was created in step 1. And we talked about step 1 creating this existential crisis. Is that I realize that I have this serious problem in my life. I've made my life unmanageable. I'm finally accepting something that was unacceptable, that I'm powerless, that my life has been unmanageable, and I don't have any clue what the hell to do with it. What do I do with that? How do I change that? Obviously, I don't have any idea about it. I don't know what I don't know, as Herb likes to say all the time. I don't know what I don't know. I can't see what I can't see. So we're left in this incredible dilemma. And I called that the existential crisis of step 1. And it creates this powerful energy. Something needs to happen. I need to be different. Something needs to be different in my life. And I have no idea what it's going to be. And then step 2 comes along, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 2 resolves that crisis by offering us hope. Hope is a powerful, powerful therapeutic force. In fact, hope is involved in every kind of healing art there is. If you go to a shaman and they say that you are being visited by a grandmother because something's unresolved, you have hope because you have an idea about what your suffering is and what's going to fix it. If you go to a medical doctor, the same thing. They say, here's your diagnosis. This is what you got to do to take care of it. You come to Alcoholics Anonymous, we tell you you're powerless, your life is beyond unmanageable, and here are the steps we took that are suggested as a program of recovery. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. We get hope. Step 2 is the installation, the inspiration of hope. Now, what I want to look at is the consciousness that we've brought into this program, that we've lived our life with. And I want to describe that consciousness as being only able to tolerate one side of an issue. So in other words, what we do is we polarize ourselves in our life. We accept one side of a pole of an issue as the right thing, the thing that we've got to be, that we've got to embrace, and we reject the other side of the pole, as that's unacceptable. I can't have that as a part of my consciousness. So we accept and reject things in life depending on whether they're congruent or incongruent with our philosophy. with the philosophy that has been programmed into us by our culture and by our families. So we can say that what happens is that this programming sets up a certain kind of a consciousness. Right? Whenever there's right, there's also wrong. Well, we look at being on the right side as what we should do. We can't be wrong. So we're going to try to live on that side of the pole. Helpful or unhelpful? Well, you want to be a good person, so you're going to try to be a helpful person and not an unhelpful person. So you're going to reject being unhelpful and try to always be helpful. Caring versus uncaring. Wow, caring, those are good people that care. An uncaring person's not a good person. I can't be like that. Right? We reject it because it doesn't fit, right, with the philosophy we have about who we should be. Powerful and powerless. Does powerless fit into our philosophy, or is that incongruent? Would that create a cognitive dissonance? Of course it would. No one wants to say I'm powerless. We want to be powerful. Manageable, unmanageable. Another one of those things. My God, those people that are managing their life got it together. Those people are unmanageable. Those are the real crazy ones, right? They can't function. They can't manage their life. Happy, sad. Successful, a failure. So our programming in life sets up an I'm okay if consciousness. I'm okay if I'm like all these things that I'm supposed to be. And now, because we are so invested in being the way that we think we're supposed to be, we will deny anything that doesn't fall into line with these ideas about how we should be. And we accept these other parts of the pole uncritically. They become absolute truths that we never question in our lives. It's just the way it is, the way we are, the way we're supposed to be. Now, remember, I've talked before how emotional sobriety is based on a consciousness of freedom. A consciousness of freedom. Well, if I'm okay, if is the consciousness I have, I cannot be free with that consciousness because I'm putting myself in a little box. I've got to be over here to be okay. I can't have that. I can't be unmanageable. That's not acceptable. You aren't going to love me if I'm like that. I can't be wrong. I've got to be right, because you're not going to want to be with a person that's wrong all the time. You're going to want somebody who's successful, not a failure. Now, remember, self-esteem, the way that Dr. Brandon defined it, is the self-evaluative component of our self-concept. It's our feelings about ourselves. Do I like myself or not? Right? Am I lovable or am I unlovable? I've got a list of things I was writing down before. Am I worthy or unworthy? Am I deserving or undeserving? Am I attractive or unattractive? Am I smart? Am I stupid or stupid? Am I capable or incapable? Am I interesting or boring? Am I of value or am I not of value? Am I competent, or do I think of myself as incompetent? Am I acceptable or unacceptable? Am I good enough, or am I never good enough? Can I be salvaged, or am I unsalvageable? Am I decent or indecent? The list can go on and on. And of course, right, our self-esteem, as Dr. Brandon says, healthy self-esteem is an utter refusal, a complete refusal to have an adversarial relationship with yourself. But if I am torn with these things and I'm not living up to be the way that I should be based on these ideas that I have been programmed with, how can I have self-esteem? If it's not okay to make a mistake and learn from it, how can I be okay when I make a mistake? Because I'm going to make mistakes. So are you. We're human beings. We're not perfect. We're imperfect. We're perfectly imperfect, right? As some people have said. We're going to do that. So here's the dilemma that we're faced with as we're beginning our journey in recovery and coming to step 2, that there's hope. The hope is that there might be another way. There might be the ability to develop a different kind of a consciousness in my life. A consciousness that if I have that life can work regardless of what's going on. That's freedom, isn't it? A consciousness that can be open to all possibilities. I don't have to be any one way to be okay. That I am okay, even if I make a mistake, even if I'm incompetent, even if I'm stupid, even if I have some flaws, even if I don't live up to society's idea of what attraction should be or looks like. Now, this is the challenge, right? This has to change in our recovery. That consciousness that defines us, that is so rigid and fixed, has to be different. And it's amazing. When I was reading the 12 and 12 today, I really read it from a different point of view because I was thinking about this. So I want you to listen to this. Bill's talking about our dilemma, right? He's talking about people that criticize religion, you know, that they're hypocrites and stuff like that. You know, he goes into that whole thing. He goes, moreover, we could avoid looking at some of our shortcomings. Well, hold on. Let me put this in context. He goes, after we came to AA, we had to recognize that this trait about feeding, our ego feeding on the faults of others, had to be looked at. That when I elevate myself by putting you down, what is that about? Am I not being self-righteous in the same way I'm accusing them of? So already in this chapter, Bill is saying, you've got to look at your process. You've got to look at your consciousness and what you're doing. Then he goes on to say, as psychiatrists have often observed, defiance is the outstanding characteristics of many alcoholics. So it is not strange that lots of us had our day at, he gives an example of defying God himself. Sometimes, now here's where the expectations come in. Listen to these. Sometimes it's because God has not delivered us the good things of life, which we specified, just like a greedy child who makes an impossible list for Santa. He's talking about the king baby, isn't he? If things go my way, I'm going to be okay. And so our idea of God, it's like a vending machine. If I'm a good person, I'll get everything I want. If I put a quarter in the vending machine and pull the thing, I should get my candy bar, shouldn't I? I paid my dues. He goes on to say, more often, though, we had met up with some major calamity, I would say some major disappointment, and to our way of thinking, lost out because God deserted us. The girl we wanted to marry had other notions. We prayed that we prayed to God that she changed her mind, but she didn't. We prayed for healthy children and were pregnant with sick ones or none at all. We prayed for promotions at business and none came. Loved ones upon whom we heartily depended were taken from us by so-called acts of God. Then we became drunkards and asked God to stop that, but nothing happened. This was the unkindest cut of all. Damn this faith business. When we encountered AA, the fallacy of our defiance was revealed. And then he goes on to say, at no time had we asked what God's will was for us. Instead, we had been telling him what it ought to be. So what happens here is Bill's challenging us that this idea that life is supposed to be a certain way, that God is supposed to do a certain thing if we wish it, that the world is supposed to conform to our expectations, to our beliefs, has to be smashed. You see, we can have no humility until we see that these demands that we make on how things are supposed to be, how God is supposed to be, how the world is supposed to be, how I'm supposed to be, how you're supposed to be, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. All we're left with is frustration, bitterness, confusion, depression, anxiety. Because my God, after all, if life isn't the way I think it's supposed to be, what is it? What can it be? Well, step 2 is telling us there's another possibility. That there's a possibility to develop a different way, a different consciousness, that we can expand our consciousness. Just like that 4-year-old child's consciousness changes around, ideas like object constancy. Well, our consciousness can change too. If we are willing, and this becomes the big thing, if we can start to develop some humility and see that we don't have to be right to be okay. We don't have to know to be okay. That's what starts to happen in this step. We start to entertain the reasonable doubt that the way we've been doing things doesn't make much sense and that there's another possibility in our life. So with that said, I will invite Roger and Herb in if they're both here. There's Herb. Good evening, Herb. I know Roger's somewhere as well. Roger, where are you?
Wonderful. Yeah, I've given some thought to this today, and I went back over my note. Oh, thanks very much, Alan, for your thoughtful unpacking of this and sort of preparing us for this dialogue. The connections. This is such a rich area. I know, like step 1, we will spend probably more than one workshop on it or one event gathering. Roger had mentioned when he was elaborating in his opening presentation several weeks ago, the various items or connections of words to the steps. And in the second item, in the 6 pillars, that second pillar, he said, is self-acceptance, humility, and truth. And it takes some unpacking to make all those connections. And not that I did when I worked the steps, but in retrospect, I was able to make those connections. As the 12 steps, keep in mind what they're for. I mean, this is for everybody to see. The purpose is to awaken. And what you're saying is, that's the consciousness is the first part. And I was thinking, as you were talking, going back to my early childhood, thinking about the environment that I grew up in, and you used the word programming today, and I haven't used that in a long time. I talk about reframing, but that programming, it really opened me up to a kind of a new perspective on it. In my environment, I had a screen of my life. On that screen in my life was never the experience of wholeness, was never the experience of joy, was never the experience of relationships and intimacy and honesty. Just the opposite, quite frankly. There was never the sense of worthiness. In fact, as you know, Alan, my father belittled me. Unfortunately, that he was not a well man, but verbally and emotionally, never physically. But I was thinking about, well, so what happened when I got into AA and when I began working the steps, and lots of things happened. But the one thing that I had a new screen. I had models of joy. I had models of intimacy. I had models of decent living. And it had never occurred to me. It wasn't in my consciousness at 43 years old with all the education I had. That none of that was in my consciousness. And so when you say that the key here is hope, that's where it comes from. Hope is not in my screen until, in fact, I'm introduced to an environment that has a positive force. You used that term. And that was the group, the AA group. Now, I'd been in therapy and self-help and personal development and all kinds of binge groups. I'd been in all of that, but it wasn't the same. It was like, if I know better, I'll be more powerful. I'll be able to do better, and then I'll be successful.
That's it.
Oh my God. And it never worked. I mean, outside, plenty. Check the box, check the box, check the box. Inside, there was always this slow burning discomfort of not fitting something. And I couldn't verbalize it, certainly at that time. But looking back, that was it. A underlying constant tension and you used a couple of terms that has so come out in my workshops from people that I've become so aware that this is the human condition. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I don't really have the value. I don't really have the confidence. I don't really have the competence. I don't really fit in. Consciously or unconsciously. It comes out as a constant theme. And I think that's the benefit of some type of a community. In the 12-step program, of course, we have the groups where there's a absolute existential, visible, measurable, tangible witness to a sense of freedom and happiness and joy. Yeah. Anyway, my thoughts.
Wonderful.
Great thoughts and passion, both. Thank you.
Well, I'm so excited because as Alan quoted me, I lived my life and I didn't know that I didn't know. That's why I'm so absolutely focused on helping people have this message become visible, because there's a solution. We don't have to suffer. Anyway, enough.
We don't have to suffer. Yeah. And you're right. And as we all know, it's hard to move from a place of suffering to a place of joy or even a place of less suffering, right? But
Yeah, that's
so, yeah. Gosh, you guys, first of all, I'm aware of the time, and I want to, based on what you guys have said, but I had this idea before we began, because it's funny, I didn't know you were going to give so much focus on consciousness tonight, but that was when I was writing some notes before we began. I, you know, I was thinking about step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I was reframing that as came to believe that a shift in my consciousness can restore me to sanity. Shifting consciousness, moving away from my narrow, excessively self-focused. And I would very much add the whole thrust of part of your presentation, Alan, which is these ideas we've absorbed, adapted, or even largely formed on our own. That I'm okay if, as you put it, I'm okay if. And those ideas become the lenses, as you and Herb like to say, through which I look at myself, through which I look at other people. And if I'm too attached, to use a Buddhist notion for a minute, to the ideas of how I have to be and how I should be, I'm not going to be able to see all kinds of aspects of myself that I just prefer not to see. And I'm going to see you only in terms of those ideas too, about how we should be as human people, as human beings. And so I love the thrust of your perspective, because that power greater than ourselves, again, many of us will name that power as God. Some will name it as, a higher power. Some will name it as a higher self. Another way to put it is a higher state of consciousness, a state of consciousness that is more able to see myself, to see you, and to see life, to see the world as it is. And again, that's often very hard to decipher and to clear up, or to get clear about. One of the things that helps me is to make a distinction between this kind of intrinsic value and worth that I believe I have as a person. And then, of course, at the level of my behavior and my thinking and my experience, all the defects and limitations and faults and false learnings and unlearned ignorance, that Nathaniel used to say that the moment we have to try to prove our intrinsic sense of worth to ourselves through our deeds, we've lost the battle before we've begun.
Well said.
We've lost the battle before we've begun, because no matter what I do to prove my sense of worth to myself, that sense of inadequacy or not good enough or less than will give me one new thing. I'll be okay for a little while, maybe. Okay, I have a sense of worth. I have a sense of value. But then very quickly, having accomplished that, quote unquote, I'll look for the next thing I have to accomplish. And that becomes the next thing I have to accomplish to become okay. And so it helps to dig in and admit my sense of inadequacy, my sense of not having worth, and look at the forces that led me to form that perspective on myself, and really begin to question that. Really begin to understand that, of course, I have more imperfections than I could ever possibly list at the level of, things I know and don't know, things I do and don't do, and so on. But those do not define my sense of worth and value as a human being. That lies beyond that territory. Now, of course, if I conduct myself in certain ways in my life and I accomplish certain things, those accomplishments can add to my self-confidence and self-respect and sense of self-worth. But at a deeper level, my worth and my value is something I need to accept rather than prove to myself. So on that note, I just wanted to suggest to those participants who would like, in your sharing, I invite you to think about shifts that you've noticed in your consciousness as a result of step one and step two. Shifts you've noticed in your perspective on yourself, on others, and on life as a result of, turning to a power greater than your typical sense of yourself. I think of it as my small self. One of my big guys in the field of psychotherapy, Wilhelm Reich, he wrote a book called Listen, Little Man, a little book. And it's all about the smallness in him, right? The pettiness and the self-centeredness and all the not at all admirable qualities. Listen, Little Man was the English translation of the title of his book. And that's another way we can think of this step is I'm moving from my small self to my higher self. My lower self might be a better term, to my higher self that shows more consideration for others, but includes me, that tries to figure out what reality is apart from my preferences about what I'd like it to be, and so on. So I just invite anyone who wants to share in terms of your personal experience, shifts in consciousness that you've experienced. Thank you.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step two comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.